Good afternoon if you're on the East Coast, or good morning. I'm glad you're here. You're welcome to the Reformed Church Center's annual General Synod recap as we talk about General Synod 2024, which has been in the books for a week and a day now. We have several people here, a couple of whom are presenting in tandem. We will start in a minute with Sherry Meyer-Veen and Micah McCreary, who are both on the Restructure Task Force. Sherry, in her real life, if she gets to have any beyond the Restructure Task Force, is co-pastor of the Niskayuna Reformed Church in New York, and Micah McCreary is president of New Brunswick Theological Seminary and a member of PFOB and a General Synod professor, and, whether he knew what he was signing up for all those years ago, we can only but guess. And they will be talking about the work of the Restructure Task Force. After that, Kelvin Spooner, who is moderator of the Commission on Race and Ethnicity, will talk about the new anti-racism initiatives that the Commission presented to General Synod and that are being discussed, and how the discussion went around those, because some of the discussion was very interesting there. And then after that, Tony Davis, representing the African American Black Council. Tony's on the staff at Rock Church in Los Angeles. And Kim Van Ness, moderator of the General Synod Council, will talk about the AABC's initiatives towards removing racism from the church order, and what General Synod Council did with that, and what General Synod did with all of what General Synod Council did. And then last, but certainly not least, Joshua Scheid will be up, and he is our brand new General Synod president. He's had many chances to run away, and he's stuck around, so now he's got to do it now. Josh is our General Synod president. He will talk about how he felt this synod went and what he sees as the challenges coming up and the joys coming up in this coming year. So, with all of that said, and without further ado, I turn this over to Sherry and Micah.
Hello, it is good to be with you all. It's good to see my dear friend, Dr. Meyer-Veen, here as well. We thought about just talking about the preliminary process. I think many of you may know about the restructuring process. And then I'll start with that, and then Dr. Meyer-Veen will take it from there, kind of what happened, and then we'll get to the General Synod. I think the best way to do it. So I guess for me, what stands out in the initial process was we knew each other, but we weren't a team. We were a number of ministers, elders, colleagues brought together to do this. And it was, I think the first 3 months or so, it was really about forming a cohesive team, which happened. I think I have to be honest, I was one of the ones who just didn't believe it was possible. We were so far apart in our thinking, where we came from in the country, our different positions about the RCA, what should happen, whether we should get rid of staff or get rid of, the structure as it is. I mean, there were so many different possible ways of doing it. And it really felt what drew us together was the whole issue of discipleship, that we really wanted to somehow end on being a denomination that disciples both the self and others. And that's really where it wanted to be. I think the process of really receiving feedback, you can probably see if you look at the different reports, you can see how we listened to our constituency and changed some things because of that. I think it's a good start.
Yes, hello everyone. James, you mentioned my quarter time role. My 3/4 time role is Minister for Renewal for the Regional Synod of Albany. And I'm very grateful. I need to mention that because it was the Regional Synod of Albany that gave me lots of time to be in this role, which was a very time-consuming role. So Micah mentioned becoming a team. The gift that the team was given was a very diverse group of people. And we tried to see that as a gift. And I think that's one of the beauties of our work together, that we kept seeing the gift in that. which also brought challenges, as Micah said, forming a team, starting with discernment. Some of you may remember the Ruth Haley Barton book, Pursuing God's Will Together. Look it up.
God's call.
Thank you. Sorry, I don't have that. That was so long ago. I don't have that in front of me, but important to say that how we go about all of this is, and how we should go about any large visioning process is to start with prayer, to start with discernment, to start with remembering who we are and whose we are. In terms of our relationship with God and each other. So trying to model that well in our process, which had 3 drafts and multiple rounds of feedback initially by Zoom and in-person roundtables. And as Micah mentioned, that leading up to the final report, which then at General Synod, so all of that history is still on the RCA website. So if any of you are tuning in that was not aware of this 2.5-year process and the multiple drafts, and I have to say the team, as we prepared for General Synod, we continued to hear lots of feedback that showed that, oh shoot, people are looking at an earlier draft. They're not seeing the nuance and the distinction between. And so that was our big concern, was making sure that General Synod was actually looking at the right thing in terms of the final report and the nuances along the way, to take what were just initial ideas of what if, how do we create a vision together, what holds us together from that early on process, and then move it to some very specific recommendations of where we saw, based on feedback people were at, with both our discernment of what we see would be necessary given current reality and given that vision of discipleship, and wanting to really reinforce the polity that is the RCA, which is an important and oft misunderstood thing. So what does that mean? That means some changes to that polity. So as James mentioned, the big first recommendation from the team, which did not come through the team. It came through the Commission on Church Order, but it was from the team. They just did what we asked them to do. And that was CO 24-4, which is a multi-pages of the actual what it looks like to condense regional synods and classes into a single assembly. And again, some of that rationale is to acknowledge our current reality as a much smaller denomination, and that we have issues with filling the volunteer load overall, and of wanting to both keep our reformed polity, but also cut down on redundancy and cut down on costs, to try to keeping the judicatory level and assembly level with the most power, the one closest to congregations. So this is a part of what the team hoped for, and the goal of, as we made these recommendations to CCO to put in the Commission on Church Order, to put in writing, and then they worked very hard and did so much on our behalf. And so we are thankful and want to take responsibility for the work that we gave them, and then that General Synod ultimately approved. And I want to say, from the team perspective, we were surprised that conversation on the floor went as quickly as it went. We expected there to be a lot more conversation about it. But one thing we noticed was that the team continued to give overviews of our reasons for what we were suggesting. And then there were small groups at Synod. And we did notice, as we were not in the small groups, but were resourcing the small groups, that the conversation along the way had shifted. That the conversation and the questions that we were being asked were no longer, should we do this or not, and became, how will we do this? So I think that was one of the market differences that we as the team noted, and maybe that is contributing to why there wasn't more conversation on the floor, and it went through with a large majority. And so that condensing also was one and the same with creating judicial bodies, because you can't have one without the other. In terms of the condensing would eliminate one of the current assemblies for the judicial process. And so how would we then account for that? So that was the CO 24-4 that was a part of our report. And then leading into, then what will we call these new bodies? So the team had suggested in our first recommendation from the team that it was a global amendment to then acknowledge and recognize that everywhere in the Book of Church Order where it says classis or classes or some derivation thereof, to rename to Middle Assembly. And our argument and rationale for that was that we are trying to create a new body and we need a shift into that recognition. And so we were asking for a new name. We admitted in the conversation that we struggled as a team with what this new name should be, that we wanted to honor the history, that we wanted to honor the fact that we are governed by assembly. And so Middle Assembly is what was recommended and is what was approved. The next two recommendations had to do with the resizing of the delegation of General Synod, acknowledging that our recommendation, the first recommendation through the Commission on Church Order, intentionally would give autonomy to every region to help as by our current polity, even though that is shifting now. If this is all affirmed, is to give autonomy to the regions to be the ones to lead a process, to name what a Middle Assembly would look like. And I do want to make sure that everyone understands, especially those that will be involved in their regional processes, which we are recommending strongly, needs to have involvement of every classis and ultimately within that of every congregation. So that our current polity suggests that regional synods create classes as the place of why we suggested that regional synods would be the one to head up a conversation that starts with what is the vision, and then moves through how do we create these new middle assemblies and who will we be together, and then how do the current classes and congregations then figure out how to affiliate with. So what I was starting to say is there is a document called Potential Principle and Process Ideas for Forming Middle Assemblies. Again, as James noted, the work of the team is done, but we also had some suggestions in how this might be done. And so as a resource for regions, as you go into this work, that document was a supplemental document that is on the RCA site. And I'm sure we can, before the end of this, when I'm done talking, I can post some of these links in the chat for everyone, so that how will we do this? So anyway, the team tried to create as many resources as possible based on the feedback that you all were giving us, in order to, again, truly have the synod discern well together and not get stuck up on one of the things, like how in the world would we do this? I'm like, well, here's some potential ideas. This is still gonna, it's out of our hands now, and here there's some resources there for you. I'd also point out with that, the oft questions about this is, are there resources to help in that? And so that answer is in the FAQ document, which is another supplemental document that the team created, and kept saying, we're hearing this feedback as a denomination. We, team strongly suggest that we come up with some resources. So there, through the denomination Lilly endowment grant that is under the heading of renovations, there are resources available for assemblies to do this work. And so note that, and you can look at that in the FAQ document. So resizing the delegation, back to that's where I left off. Sorry, you're following my bounce. The noting that we're giving autonomy to all the regions to figure out how to do this. And we give some suggestions about size. We give suggestions. We believe that we want these new middle assemblies to be staffed, because we believe that we want them to have capacity to do the work that needs to be done. And so that we give all those suggestions. Now, what you all as the church do with them is undetermined. And so how will we then come together as the church? So in our way of answering that, we gave RF 24-2 and RF 24-3 to resize the delegation of General Synod and adjust the approval process for changes to the BCO. And so the new recommendation is that that was passed. And again, these are now recommended amendments for the BCO, which will then have to be processed through classes for approval. So there's understanding what happens next with each of these. Some of these, in order to take effect, will have to go through the 2/3 of classes to be affirmed at the next synod. Go through all the classes, but a 2/3 vote of affirmation, and then will be necessary. So what was passed is to receive one minister and one elder delegate for each 2,000 confessing members or fraction thereof. As how the delegations for General Synod will be in the future, and then the approval process is a bigger change, noting that if some of our assemblies end up being of increasingly different sizes, that 2/3 ratification will be done based on the number of delegates. So it will be a weighted 2/3 is the suggestion that is going to the classes. So if you are a classes delegate, you'll want to look at some of the specifics thereof, and understand how that might work. Again, from the team perspective, it's just trying to give full autonomy to each of the regions and potential groupings that may want to become middle assemblies, and then to say, and how do we come together as General Synod? And then also from the team perspective, it's always important to name back to our polity that the emphasis shouldn't be on General Synod. The emphasis should be on the middle assembly. The emphasis should be on getting the most resources to the local congregations, and the middle assembly as the first and primary place where those come from. And so how do we equip that middle assembly to do its work and not over focus on General Synod? Have General Synod be the gathering place where we come together and continue to resource each other to be the church, but based on our polity, recognizing and keeping the authority at the middle assembly level. So, Micah, I think we are to you and to talk about what's going on with the PFOB recommendation, et cetera.
Yeah. And we actually met as the Pastoral Formation Oversight Board yesterday and started working on this. And what the recommendation was really focused on was really looking at a way to make ordination equitable and just, would be a broad overstatement of that particular recommendation. And there was also at Synod, there was added a clause to really make sure the theology matched the Reformed theology, persons coming in. And so the way that it seemed like our discussions were headed yesterday was the certificate of readiness for examination, that be not only given by the seminaries, New Brunswick and Western Theological Seminary, but that we would create a new office of ordination and licensing. And that office would make sure that whoever comes to the alternate route process, anyone who does not come from the formula of agreement, but comes as a minister with ordination from another denomination or another part of the world, that they still would have to look at how would they get that certificate of readiness for examination. And that would be one of the pieces that will be there, and how then that would be equitable, how that would be just, will be the work that we'll do from once we get the official office established first. So that's as we're working on today. And in 2 weeks, we'll start working on the rest of it as well. And then that recommendation was also amended to include consultation with the Commission on Race and Ethnicity, Commission on Women, and a couple of others as well. And so we'll reach out to them and make sure that happens as well. Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to pay attention to the Q&As as they come through, and I see there's a question about the archives. And I just want to name that there's a lot of questions about what happens with a lot of the agencies and the various other affiliated nonprofits, even, for example, right now, where the Regional Synod of Albany is the official owner of Camp Fowler. What happens if the Regional Synod of Albany dissolves? And I've heard this about Warwick and lots of other places in the various agencies. I do want to note that in the FAQ document, there is some conversation, and to note that the restructuring team in some of the conversations about some of these what if scenarios, it's not our role to name that, but to note that there is flexibility in the difference between when the restructuring team is asking for this condensing, the legal corporations are different. There's a difference between the assembly bodies and the legal corporations. And it may, as you look at the FAQ document, you may notice, I'll try to, I was just trying to get those links and realize the link I had pulled up only had the final report, doesn't actually have those two supplemental documents. So I will make sure that those get to you before the end of this webinar. It is on the workbook page. So that's the page I'm looking for if somebody else wants to pull it up. So the potential principle and process ideas of forming middle assemblies is one resource document, and the other is frequently asked questions resource document. So I think, Micah, do I need to say more about that question? We can't answer what will happen to the archives. Thank you, Cameron. And those things, but we want to note that the point of the process is to focus on what is the vision, and as you then focus on what is the vision, then is to figure out, okay, and how do we continue to do the work that we need to do, which is essentially important. And we're very grateful and thankful for all the work of the archives. And obviously we need to find a way to make it workable as we move to a new structure for all of our agencies and other affiliated nonprofits.
And it seemed like, too, that the archives were actually celebrated during the Synod. Several times it was mentioned the great work that's being done by the new director. So yeah, that's there as well.
Held at New Brunswick Theological Seminary. There's your plug.
Yes.
So the next recommendation after, as Micah just mentioned, the equitable and just ordination and reception process was the adjustments to commissions. And this is one of those, along the way, there were different recommendations, and that's not the final recommendation was adjusting the size and membership requirements of commissions. There are 11 General Synod commissions, and they are along the way of the process. I feel like the restructuring team, as a team, came around to listening to the feedback and honoring and celebrating the work of the commissions as the work of the church and naming that. And so we want to make sure that is the final word that the church receives, and an invitation and to participate in the commissions as the work of the church, and to name that it's been very hard to fill the commissions. And so to invite all of you to fill out what used to be called a talent bank form, now I think it's called a profile form, and as a step for how you might serve on one of the commissions. It is the role of the General Synod Council to regularly review commissions, and this proposal, which was amended to include what was passed from our RF 24-6, was amended to include the potential of one in-person meeting a year. So one of these readjustments was to name the cost of commissions and to try to eliminate some of that cost to ask commissions to meet online. During the synod and during the conversation, we heard several feedback of the commissions that are already being very conscious of cost. And so I want to acknowledge and recognize, good job. And what was approved was the adjustments to the size. So there will be a joint committee of nominations and church order with GSC to reduce the number of members on commissions and simplify the requirements for commission representation. So that was 24-6. 24-7 was related to gifted elders serving as supervisors of churches. This is the suggested BCO change that is going to classes is where it says minister of word and sacrament or elder, giving middle assemblies the prerogative to use gifted elders in the supervision process of churches. And there's lots I could say about this. I'm noting that we're already maybe over our allotted time, James. So I will just name that's what was approved. And this just gives the middle assembly the prerogative. And I think they did add amend training in. So one of the hard things, was that we as restructure team could not see any screens. So I'm remembering verbally. And as I went back, Joshua, to look at what was the specific of what was approved, it's not actually up on the website yet. So Joshua, I'm going to rely on you to correct anything I've said incorrectly. That's my recollection. So the next recommendation from the team related, and I want to say from the team perspective, there were a lot of misunderstandings about both of these ones, the gifted elders and the deacons recommendations that the team really didn't get a chance to speak from because we had to be quiet and let Synod talk, which is probably a part of why then the deacon conversation was I think that was almost the longest, but it certainly was the closest vote of the entire Synod. And that recommendation, which would have allowed, the recommendation was actually to have Commission on Theology and Order and the professorate to explore and bring back recommendations for deacons to serve on middle assemblies. That was the recommendation, and it was defeated by essentially one vote, by two which showed, but if one person had voted differently, well, it still would have been defeated, but it would have been a tie vote. So it was defeated by 2 votes as the closest vote. So then the recommendation are, I've lost track of the numbering. It's not on the sheet I'm looking at, sorry. But thank you. About the covenant shares, that was a very interesting watching the processing of Synod. Early on, there was a recommendation to amend the timeline, which went through. And then everyone said, wait a minute, this isn't even possible. And so then the whole thing was voted down. That's my summary of what happened. So the 2% limit for covenant shares was voted down as the recommendation from the team. And then the last recommendation from the team was to experiment with consensus model for the next 3 years at the GSC level and at the General Synod level. So that, I skipped over General Synod meetings. I'll come back to that. So that was approved, and there still does seem to be a questioning of what does consensus mean and what can it do for us. And so this approval of experimentation, with experimentation being the operative word, hopefully will be a time of learning for all of us to answer those questions. So coming back to the resizing the delegation of General Synod, the second one, hold General Synod some of you may notice there is if you pulled up earlier, it used to say on the General Synod, on the current website, hold General Synod every 3 years. I already caught like 2 misunderstandings from that. That's not what the team recommended. And they have since, I believe, just changed that this morning to say hold General Synod in person every 3 years. So the team's recommendation is that, and now it's out of the team's hand, but is to give to the Commission on Church Order, which yes, we've given a lot of work to the Commission on Church Order, to propose amendments to the BCO. So General Synod meets in person every 3 years and online every year. So this would result in some substantial changes to our bylaws for Synod that would allow for online meetings of Synod. And what does that mean? Which the team has lots of suggestions that were in our report and that ultimately was approved in that manner. So that it is now out of our hands in terms of what the team suggested, but the team suggested that we would like to see online meetings that may not be 6 days, but maybe are 3 or 4 days that still have substantial substance, that still allow and have breakout rooms for some of the best of Synod, which is relationship building, which we believe can be done online. And I know that not everyone agrees with that. And I'll just leave it at that. And from, as we listen to feedback from many different denominations and look at the reality of where the denomination is currently at fiscally, as well as acknowledge and recognize there again, trying to shift and over focus on General Synod and have the focus be back where we believe it appropriately belongs, on the middle assemblies. So those are all part of the rationale of why we suggested those things, and that did go through. I think I have now named all that have gone through, and ask Micah any concluding words on what it was like to be a part of the team, or other things you want to say that I have not.
Nope. That's my favorite word. No, it was great working with you and working with the team, and serving the denomination. I mean, that was an honor, and we received it as that, and hopefully it will turn out to be helpful. You know. And there was one question about whether the in-person meetings would begin in 2026, and someone just replied correctly that the Senate was saying that it would start in 2028.
Yeah, and so it's the recognition that each of these recommendations will take time to implement, and and anything that involves a BCO change will have to go through the classes in the quote normal process, and so that's how things will be going forward. And I do want to point out from the conclusion of the restructure team report is that, again, the desire of the team to have this be a hopeful and exciting time of refocusing as a denomination away from the things that are dividing us to the things that unite us in the forming of vision and the figuring out of what it will take for mutual flourishing in all of our assemblies, and ultimately to be resourcing and supporting our congregations and ministries.
Thank you, Sherry and Micah. Just a quick note, because we're starting to ask both to the panelists and to everybody out in the webinar, we're starting to ask questions and the panelists want to answer them. There are 163 of us in this meeting at the moment. If we start doing that, this will be the first 5 or 6 hour Reformed Church Center meeting. We will not need to worry about when the General Synod starts meeting every 3 years, because we'll all still be here. So please hang on to your questions. We will get to the end of all the presentations, and then we will open it up to everyone so that we can have some discussion and answer questions. Find out where your electronic hand is down at the bottom with all your Zoom buttons down at the bottom of your screen so that you can be ready for that. And all of that being said, I now call on Kelvin Spooner to share about the core report.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before I start, I just want to point you all to two places on the General Synod live stream that you can go to actually see, if you have not done so already, some of the work and discussions that we've talked about. I want to direct you to the Thursday afternoon plenary, the very first opening plenary, where Reverend Jeremy Simpson of Office of Race of Diversity and Belonging, as well as Martha Drea of Northwestern College Diversity Office, they gave a wonderful anti-racism training where we discussed the history of racism, how it affects all of us, no matter who we are, and ways that we are able to come together in spite of the differences and the histories and the varied traditions that we have. So that's on the Thursday afternoon plenary. The second one would be the Saturday afternoon plenary, where the Commission on Race and Ethnicity gave its report, which occurs after the break. So if you don't want to see everything, all of the commissions gave their reports, and they're all good and they're all very important. But if you want to scroll forward to see this handsome face, scroll forward to after the break, and you'll hear the report from the Commission on Race and Ethnicity on the Saturday afternoon plenary. So with that being said, I just want to give a brief overview of our report in core. Basically, we brought two recommendations to the floor of General Synod. The first recommendation, and both recommendations, had to do with the work that's going on in the commissions and the voices of all of the racial ethnic councils being heard within the commissions. Currently in our Book of Church Order, only two commissions, the Commission on Race and Ethnicity, as well as the Commission on Nominations, require that there is a seat from each of the four racial ethnic councils of our denominations. The other commissions, of which there are a total of 11, do not have that mandate. Therefore, the voices and the perspective and the ideas of this rich, diverse denomination may not be included in the discipleship work of all of the other commissions. And CORE felt that those voices should be included in the decisions and the discussions that every commission has in the work that they do. So CORE brought to the floor RE 24-1, which said to direct the General Synod commissions to annually seek advice and input from each racial and ethnic council in order to incorporate their experiences and concerns into the commission's missions and goals. And each commission is to provide the General Synod Council with its annual schedule of engagement with the councils, and further to direct GSC to monitor how each commission implements its engagement with the councils, and to include its findings and evaluations of the commission in its evaluations of the commissions as per the BCO. When this was presented on the floor, the Special Advisory Committee on Overtures and New Business recommended that this recommendation be referred to the Commission on Church Order in consultation with the Commission on Race and Ethnicity to incorporate RE 24-1 into the bylaws of General Synod. The reason is to basically give it more teeth and to incorporate it so that it will be something that will be in the bylaws as General Synod moves forward. There was no discussion on that recommendation, and that recommendation overwhelmingly passed quietly. So then we moved to RE 24-2. In RE 24-2, CORE felt that in order for the anti-racism, equity, and inclusion to continue to be manifested within our denominations and particularly within our commissions, that anti-racism training should be something that should be ongoing in the life of our commissions. CORE recommended and brought to the floor RE 24-2, which says to direct each General Synod Commission to participate in an anti-racism training at least once every 2 years. The training is to include discussion on how the RCA's anti-racism policy affects the commission work. This training can coincide with opportunities offered through or approved by the RCA Office of Diversity and Belonging. Working through the staff office will enable commissions to find trainings that are both meaningful and do not have additional budgetary impact. This recommendation generated a lot of discussion. There were generally some that were for, and before we even got into a deep discussion, someone from the floor brought an amendment to our recommendation of 24-2 to include in the sentence that, let me see, I got it right here, let me pull it up, that clearly that each General Synod Commission to participate in anti-racism training that clearly states that all racism affects people of all colors. And that generated much discussion, and there was a tension in the room. There was a uncomfortableness in the room because talking about race and racism and racial justice and reconciliation is a difficult subject to talk about, and the discussion was long, and thankfully for the vast majority of it, it was nuanced and it was respectful, and we went back and forth with that discussion on just that amendment alone for a good little while. And I'm so happy that Dr. Micah, President Micah of the seminary, he pointed out that we should make note of the comfort and the discomfort that we are all feeling in the room, and to pay attention to it, and not to get angry, and not to get shut down, and not to shut down because we are all family, and we need to appreciate dealing with this rather than pushing it aside because of the uncomfortableness that we may be feeling. So I think that gave an energy to the room to continue to press forward in this discussion. So we went back and forth with the amendment, and finally with the amendment, when it came to a vote, that particular amendment was defeated. So we went back to original motion, and then that discussion continued as well. There was one person from the floor who brought up the consistorial report form of the research that CORE had done in analyzing that. in the consistorial CRF form, there's a question that asks, did your church host or participate in any anti-racism training in the past year? And of the 717 churches that responded, only 51 acknowledged that they did either participate or host an anti-racism training, which meant that 93% did not. So he questioned what was the commission going to do in order to change those numbers around. And I had to tell them that it wasn't up to the commission to change those numbers around. It was up to the churches and the congregations to have a will to do the work. Because what I didn't say, which I'll say to you all now, we were analyzing the data that was collected. So it was not us that were, we were just reporting it out. So it's really up to the churches and the congregations, the various assemblies, whether it's the classes, the regional synods, or the local churches who have a will to do anti-racism work and anti-racism training. So that's how I responded to him, and the discussion continued. One of the overarching themes that I observed that different people had different interpretations of how they view racism. In the anti-racism training, both Jeremy and Martha pointed out how racism goes beyond the individual view of how one sees racism or how they may speak towards or act towards an individual, that racism is much larger than that, that it goes into our institutions, it goes into our culture, and it's a much broader issue that we deal with. So some came to the microphone with the individual interpretation, speaking about the I, and others came to the floor talking about the we and the broader systemic ramifications of racism. So we went back and forth with that for a long while as well. At the end of the day, to make a long story short, the delegates of the General Synod overwhelmingly passed the recommendation to have anti-racism training be done at least once every 2 years within all of our commissions. So that's how that went, and we were glad and we were happy that they were both able to get through. Just two quick short things as an epilogue after that. We were glad, and you'll hear the recommendations following me coming from the African American Black Council and the wonderful work that they have done. But I just want to point out, then I'm going to be quiet, that we still have a long way to go. I want to share two quick things with you. Even though we had the anti-racism training, even though we had these long discussions about our thoughts of racial justice and diversity and inclusion, at the end of General Synod on Tuesday afternoon, on the bus, I was on one of the buses going to the airport, one of the 32-seat buses, and the bus was full by the time I got on. So I had to go to the back of the bus, to that long seat that goes across the back of the engine. That's that 5-seater that goes across the back of the engine. And we ride to the airport, and on the way getting off, there's 5 of us on that last seat. There's 2 of us of color, 3 white folks. And getting ready to get off the bus, one of the white men in a hee-hee-ha-ha moment says to me, "Oh, you guys have been to the back of the bus far too long." Now, for him, I guess that was his way of communicating and saying, yeah, I get it. To me, that was a microaggression because you don't need to say to me that I've been in the back of the bus. I know that history. I've been there. You don't have to say that to me. I didn't say anything to him. I let it go. But that still demonstrates how far we still have to go. We have to be careful of what we say. We have to be careful of how we act because we are just in a place where we need to be aware and come together. And finally, I just want to say that of all the great work that was done last week in the work of the Office of Diversity and Belonging and the great work that was done by Reverend Jeremy Simpson and his people in the worship and everything else, I have to say that his position, because we were all dealing with these budget cuts, and his position and his job was a casualty of the budget cuts. So Reverend Jeremy Simpson is going to be losing his job. The Office of Diversity and Belonging, he was told is going to be spread out amongst the other staff. I don't have no idea of what that's going to look like or how that's going to work, but it just seems odd to me, and this is just me, that after all of this work that was being done and pushing us forward racially, that the Office of Racial and Diversity is being cut and eliminated not even a week after our General Synod. So I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
And thank you, Kelvin. And Kim and Tony, you are up.
Well, Kim, I guess we can go home now. I think Kelvin said it all. I just want to take this time just to reflect that even in General Synod, on the Synod floor, we did follow the Council of Race and Ethnicity, and it was the impact of the room and the flow of the room also led to where we're going now. I also want to, just before I start, thank for presenting at General Synod, I want to thank Reverend Dr. Patricia Seeley for doing that. And then, and here we go. First of all, I wanted to say I'm honored to address you today. And following General Synod and on behalf of the AABC, I really want to extend some heartfelt appreciation to everyone who helped the AABC form our recommendations. And I also want to thank the General Synod Council for its diligent work and insightful response and their recommendations that they carried to the floor on our behalf. The General Synod Council's efforts have been instrumental in our discussions and deliberations while we were there, ensuring we continue progressing toward a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive denomination. I also want to thank the General Assembly floor at Synod had shown a remarkable dedication in its discussion and the amendments that were made. The engagement has significantly broadened the scope of our efforts, allowing us to address a wider range of issues that impact the communities we serve. These discussions and the subsequent amendments are vital in making the Reformed Church in America a welcoming home for all who seek to belong here, regardless of race, ethnicity, and now ability or background. I also want to express a great gratitude for the General Synod Council's commitment to taking our recommendations seriously. The African American Black Council presented several key recommendations aimed at addressing systemic issues within our Book of Church Order and broader church practices. We are gratified that the General Synod Council meticulously developed these recommendations and presented them as 5 distinct proposals for approval at General Synod. These 5 recommendations that we sent to the General Synod Council are more than just policy changes. They're a call to action for all of us to confront and transform the structures and behaviors that historically marginalize people of color within our denomination. The AABC's report highlighted the need for an inclusive understanding of what it means to be part of the RCA, emphasizing that everyone should feel at home here, not like a guest in someone else's house. The recommendations put forward to the council included crucial changes such as amending the preamble to explicitly state the inclusion of all Christians, regardless of race, ethnicity, color, or class, ensuring class ministries reflect the diversity of the communities they serve, incorporating the Bell Hall Confession alongside the Heidelberg Catechism in regular worship services to strengthen our commitment to anti-racism, implementing term limits for elders and deacons to promote diverse and equitable leadership, requiring adequate training for ministers of word and sacrament to effectively serve in diverse geographic and contextual and cultural contexts. These recommendations to General Synod Council are designed to move our polity in a more anti-racist direction. The steps are they are steps towards ensuring that all members who want to experience the RCA as their home do indeed feel at home. It is very much worth noting, without stealing Kim's thunder, that the discussion from the floor to increase what we all saw as inclusive was extended to include the abilities of all. I also would like to thank members of the floor who refocused us when times may have been starting to get sidetracked. I just want to thank all those members who are on the floor that refocused us on the intent of the goals of the AABC recommendations. Our journey toward truly inclusive church is ongoing, and it requires the collective effort and commitment of every delegate and member and person of the RCA. As we move forward, let us remain steadfast in our dedication to making the RCA a place where every person can fully participate and bring their whole selves to our shared ministry. I just want to thank everybody, especially the General Synod Council, for their thorough work, and to the General Assembly for its thoughtful voices and constructive contributions. Together, like at this Synod from the floor, I felt like, compared to my one other one before, this time I felt that together we are building a stronger, more inclusive Reformed Church in America. I also want to bless Jeremy Simpkins and the worship team. Those young people, I've met them for 2 years. I also want to thank everybody from everywhere who participated in Sunday worship with us. It was good to hear a choir again of people who just wanted to get up and sing for the Lord. So I thank all of those people. And if you ever see the pictures that are online and popping up on social media, it looks like what we want the Reformed Church in America to be. And with that, before I say too much, I have to pass it to Kim.
Thank you, Tony. I want to thank the African American Black Council, the AABC, for their great work and respectful communication with the GSC. It was an honor to work on these recommendations with them. A value that I've tried to live into in the past year is to assume best intent. And I felt that the AABC and the GSC did that as we communicated back and forth about these recommendations. In my mind, the AABC's work exemplified the best of what the Reformed Church in America's racial ethnic councils do: to deeply study an issue, then bring the issue to the attention of the denomination along with specific suggestions for how to be better. In this case, how to better live into our anti-racism vision. What the General Synod Council brought as motions to this year's General Synod all pertain to changes to the Book of Church Order, the BCO. We brought 5 motions and all were approved, a couple with slight amendments. So I'll just go into a little more detail about the things that Tony alluded to. First, the AABC argued and the GSC agreed that right from the beginning of the BCO, the preamble should make clear who is being referenced by words such as all people and members. Given the fact that for most of RCA history, the majority of members have been people of Dutch descent, specifically males, it is important that the preamble to the BCO explicitly state that people called to ministry include those from every tongue, tribe, and nation, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, color, or class. Moreover, the motion included a change to the end of the preamble to recognize the RCA's sin, past and present, in the area of racism and our need to reform. This motion elicited quite a bit of discussion on the Synod floor as people debated the list of groups to include. But in the end, people of all abilities was added to race, ethnicity, color, and class, and that motion passed. Note that once as Sherry alluded to, once a General Synod motion to change the BCO passes, it's then sent to classes, our lower assemblies. For the BCO to ultimately be changed, the change needs to pass one synod, be approved by 2/3 of the classes, then ratified by the subsequent synod. Only then is the BCO actually changed. So we hope that these motions, these past motions to change the BCO, are the first step in changing them. The next motion relevant to the Book of Church Order pertained to a section outlining the responsibilities of classes. The AABC made the point, and the GSC agreed, that the work of the classes should take into account the diversity within its bounds, and that the BCO should explicitly state this ideal. In other words, a classis should recognize the demographic groups in the communities represented by their churches, and then consider their needs when planning classis ministry. This motion also passed with slight wording changes. The next proposed change to the BCO relates to the RCA's 4 doctrinal standards, which are the Heidelberg Catechism, the Belgic Confession, the Canons of Dort, and the Confession of Belhar. Currently, the BCO states that the points of doctrine contained in the Heidelberg Catechism shall be explained by minister at regular services of worship. Given that the only standard of unity directly guiding us toward a future freed from racism is the Confession of Belhar, the AABC recommended adding the Belhar to this preaching directive in the BCO. The AABC noted that Sunday worship services are the optimal time to provide biblical and theological anti-racism instruction to RCA members. The GSC understood this argument, but felt as if congregants would benefit from the teaching of all 4 Reformed confessions, including the Heidelberg and Belhar. Therefore, the GSC brought a motion to the General Synod that the points of doctrine contained in all 4 doctrinal standards be explained in worship services, so that, as the wording goes, the exposition of them is completed with a period of 4 years. Here I will bring up the fact that when recommendations are brought to General Synod, before being presented to the full assembly of delegates, they are first reviewed by a Synod Advisory Committee. The Advisory Committee suggests to the whole assembly whether the recommendation should be adopted, amended, or denied. In this case, in the case of this recommendation from the GSC, the Synod Advisory Committee recommended returning to the AABC's original recommendation to add only the Belhar Confession alongside the Heidelberg Catechism from which to regularly preach related doctrine. The Advisory Committee felt that since the Belhar was the only doctrinal standard addressing racism, it should be elevated in this way. The Assembly agreed and voted in favor of this change to the BCO. The next 2 motions are related to the role of classes in ensuring that ministers of word and sacrament, as well as candidates for commissioning, are adequately trained to serve their congregations and communities. Whereas the BCO already outlines the biblical, theological, and ecclesiastical training expected, the GSC agreed with the AABC that the need for cultural training is also often needed. Though this point may appear obvious, historically, ministers and other leaders in RCA churches have not always been adequately trained to serve sensitively where they have been placed. In contrast, ministers and commissioned pastors well acquainted with cultural distinctives are best positioned to bring the good news to their church's members or their assigned mission field. General Synod agreed, passing motions that ask classes to ensure that all enrolled ministers and candidates for commissioned pastors are adequately trained to serve fruitfully in the urban, suburban, rural, and/or tribal areas to which they are assigned. That is my explanation of the motions passed by the 2024 General Synod to make the Book of Church Order more anti-racist.
Thanks, Tony and Kim. Josh, wrap it up so we can have some free-for-all.
Sounds good, James. Thank you. And yeah, welcome to everybody. First, I do want to say, Kelvin, with what you shared, that I am sorry for the experience you had there on the way to the airport. I will try to keep this brief, James, so that we can have a free-for-all. James asked, what's it like being up at the front table and to describe the mood of General Synod, the mood of the assembly as we gathered and discussed and went through the processes of doing all this work that you have heard about so far. And I'm not the first person to say it, but I'll summarize it in one word. And to me, that's hopeful. I think everything that we experienced at General Synod last week, by and large, the sum total with restructuring, with the anti-racism work, that it's hopeful, and I'm very hopeful about our future, recognizing in each of these elements that it's a first. We've taken some steps, and we're not there yet. But it felt really good to take some really important steps in all of these areas. It's very different being up at the table than on the floor. There were times I wanted to be able to go to a mic and I couldn't. But I will say, as in the last year as vice president, and then through the week of General Synod, I'm just so grateful. It was a joy to be able to work so closely and support and encourage our president, Judy Nelson, who just did a marvelous job of facilitating our conversations as General Synod. And I think we're all so grateful for her giftedness and for her leadership. And also to work so closely with Kim, who as moderator of GSC, for both of them, just really was a joy. I think in terms of the challenges and opportunities in the year ahead, that's the other question James wanted me to touch on briefly. They're similar. The challenge is encouraging our classes, perhaps middle assemblies and regional synods, encouraging us to continue this work that has been started, that to me so clearly has been a work of God to bring all of us to where we were, to bring the General Synod together. There have been some comments about the overwhelming vote totals by which these various recommendations were adopted. To me, so clearly to sense that God is in our midst, and that God is with us, and that God hasn't, abandoned or left or forsaken the RCA. I mean, isn't that our dream, really, as people following Jesus, as disciples? I think to be reaffirmed in that was so very significant. And so the challenge is encouraging one another to continue this work that's been started, this gift of an opportunity that is before us, and just believing we can do it together. That's also the opportunity. We are at a season in the Reformed Church of America where the work of so many, but mostly I think the work of the Holy Spirit, has given us an opportunity to reevaluate everything we're doing, to see how we can best serve our local churches, our ministries, our missions that are on the ground in communities, changing lives, to reevaluate the work we're doing, to best together start and strengthen churches, ministries, and missions. And I think that's what it's all about. And so I was so encouraged by the steps we've taken. I'm so hopeful for our multi-ethnic, multiracial, multicultural, and even global future of the Reformed Church in America. And I have to say to three of my brothers who have presented, just a thank you. It was alluded to, our choir experience at General Synod, and it really was an honor and a joy for me that you allowed me to be able to sing with you and next to you. That was so fun, and I hope we can do that again.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, everybody. I invite folks to find their electronic hands. I know some of you are sending me little notes because I guess you don't want to speak out loud, because I know that people like David Grunewald are naturally so reticent to speak in public. That's why he became a minister. Yes, that was a dig, David. Sorry. But we're going to start off with Susan Mulholland, and I am going to ask her to unmute and go ahead and share.
Hello, everybody. My question is going back to Tony Davis, and I wasn't clear, the amended preamble discussion, did that in fact end up including the word gender?
I have to defer to Kim because she brought it to the floor.
The original motion did include the word gender, and the word abilities was added on, through an amendment on the floor. There was another amendment to include gender orientation, but that amendment did not pass. And so there was this original motion, the word abilities was added, and that motion was passed.
Thank you.
Okay, my brother David Grunewald put up with my gentle ribbing and has his hand up. So David, go ahead and unmute.
I'm not sure if Kim just answered this, but again, I was wondering if sexual orientation was mentioned as being included in all. There has been a previous overture to General Synod to clarify that all does mean all, and that all sexual orientations were included in that. So are we not supposed to talk about that anymore?
James, since Cameron Van Coten Lawhead made a kind of pivotal statement on the floor related to that, could we invite him to say more?
I'm just working on that. He's just gotten the power to talk if he goes ahead and unmutes.
And I had just raised my hand while David was talking because I thought I might respond to this. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, James. Yeah, so like a recommendation was brought in that conversation to add sexual orientation. And there were a few comments made by people of all different political persuasions and of understandings of human sexuality that seemed clear that this was not the time for that specific element to be added. And I could feel the tension in the room in that moment. It was kind of everybody held their breath. It'd been the thing we hadn't talked about all week. It felt a little tense. And I felt called in that moment to get up to the microphone and encourage people to vote against the amendment. For two parts. One, because I think we often forget that people of all races and tribes and abilities, that includes people of various sexual orientations and gender identities. These are not separate groups. But also, this is a conversation we will be able to have on the floor of General Synod someday in a way that isn't painful or kind of a cause for concern, but that day was not the right day. It felt like it was only going to serve to derail the conversation from race and ethnicity. And I deeply love the brother who brought the recommendation and so appreciated that it got named in the room. But it just felt in that moment like the room needed the chance to just breathe and accept that, okay, this is not this exact conversation. And there's a whole other host of issues that would come along with adding there are ways in which the RCA, there's mechanisms within the RCA to affirm people of various sexual orientations and gender identities. I don't know that we are at a place where adding those to the preamble to the Constitution is workable at the moment. I think that would exacerbate a lot of issues. So to answer your question, David, yes, it was discussed. And no, I don't think this is something that we should stop discussing. But the way that it was happening at General Synod just seemed like not the right moment.
Thank you, Cameron. Not seeing anybody else from the panel jumping up to say any more about that right now. Wait,
Dr.
Tony,
Brum?
go.
Yeah, okay. So now that the people who are on commission that can bring stuff to the floor have spoken, no, I think it was the intent of the AABC. It's pretty hard not to put like the word gender in when we're celebrating our 51st year of women in ministry. So I think like when we're talking the word gender, like it would kind of undo one of the greatest parts of the RCA and how we appreciate the sisters that we have in ministry. And like, once again, when I said I want to thank somebody from the floor, Cameron, I didn't know that Cameron was in, but there were, like he said, there were several, but it refocused on what our intent was, just to change systemic racial difference was happening in the RCA. And we have discussed that across different of the other councils. So I appreciate that. Cameron, I just want to thank you again, but I also want to appreciate again all of the sisters and the long history they have in the RCA of being in the pulpit and doing leadership.
Okay. Thank you.
James.
Yeah, Kim. Oh, Sherry, sorry.
Yeah, I hesitate, I may make fool out of myself here, but I do want to know as we're listening to what's happening in other denominations, and this does relate with restructuring team in terms of the restructuring team's understanding out of Vision 2020, and the RCA is at a unique place where we are seeking to say that that we will hold the tension between diverse perspectives, and that is different than what's happening in other denominations. And so part of this is a question of how do we do that?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Sherry. Thank you, everybody. Paul Jansen put a question in the Q&A, and he's excused from not speaking because his microphone is not working for him. But he asks, I would like to know if anybody knows if any other positions were eliminated since the General Synod. This came up at a classis meeting last night, and we didn't want to act precipitously. I regret that I can't ask online because my microphone is on the fritz. Anyway, there's the question. Does anybody know?
I see Sherry nodding her head.
And I would expect, I don't know, Kim, are you still in the position to get GSC communications? Okay.
Yes,
I
yes.
shouldn't be the one to speak to this.
I'll just simply say yes. Jeremy's was not the only position. And it's not fun for Pastor Eddie or anyone to let people go, people whom you love and value.
Okay. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Sherry. Deborah Daly, go ahead and unmute and share with the group.
Hello.
Hello.
Turn up my volume a little if you can hear me. This comes from, well, let me tell you that I am a preaching elder at a very small, very rural church in Southern Albany County in New York, a Nesquithal Reformed Church. We'll be celebrating our 200th anniversary this year. We have members who faithfully read emails that come with reports on General Synod, on Regional Synod. And the question that was raised, if I can frame it properly, from a member was, I've read 2 emails recently, and it seems that our denomination is bogged down in what divides us, as is the nation, and when will the Reformed Church focus on needs of constituents like child sexual abuse and slavery and some of the issues that God's people experience, rather than continuing to focus on division? That was the question from a pew on Sunday.
Well, while the panel is thinking, I'll start off by saying I've got lots of friends in Enniscortha, so tell them I said hi.
I sure will, James. We often remember when you were our supervising minister.
And so that's part one. Part two is, unless Cameron raises his hand because he wants to talk some more, the Commission on Christian Action is always at work on these things and is probably always looking for people to fill out their profile forms so they can come and help. But he just raised his hand, so here he goes.
Okay.
Cameron?
I was just going to say the same thing, James. Yeah, so for the next 4 days, I am still the moderator of the Commission on Christian Action. And this is exactly the kind of work that we strive to do and call the church into action on. These things that are broader and outside of ourselves, and the things that affect our communities and the world. I just dropped in the chat again the nominations profile form. As somebody mentioned earlier, I think it was Sherry mentioned how difficult it is for us to find people to serve on any of our RCA commissions, and the CCA is not unique in that. But we have our new incoming moderator is fantastic, and if you go ahead and reach out to James, and he will connect you with the people who can take these things up if you know him. Yeah, these are conversations that we need to keep having, that we are trying to have. Please join us in this work.
I will pass that along. I think that also, as far as communication, what this member was feeling, he reads what comes through, but if it's not shared, then it's not there for him to read. So perhaps it's a matter, I don't know. We're always trying to improve communication. But what has come and then is into the Enniscortha Church email and then is shared by email with our congregation has been reports of the General Synod, for example. And so perhaps some additional, I don't know. I don't know where to go with it, but I will certainly share information on the Commission on Christian Action. And if there's any ideas I come up with about how to better get that out to the members who are the ones that will be doing that kind of work, then I'll share that or
Thanks,
let me know.
Deborah. I think part of what I hear you expressing too is the difficulty with the RCA functioning with a limited staff.
Yes.
Who can't or don't necessarily have the time and bandwidth to share everything that the denomination is doing.
Yes.
So this is where it gets important for us to have those relationships and those creative avenues to share more broadly the things that are happening. So I appreciate your question.
Yes, thank you. And we understand and appreciate your answer because, like I said, a really small church and struggling ourselves with how to share information just among ourselves when there's so few of us to do that. So I feel that.
Okay.
Deborah, I just wanted to draw
Yes.
your attention to the chat where I put a couple other links that may be of interest to your constituents.
Thank you very much.
Okay. And Cameron, so in 5 days, when we're celebrating the independence of Canada and the independence of the current moderator of CCA. Who is the moderator of CCA?
The incoming moderator will be the Reverend Ann Elzinga.
Okay.
Oh.
So, she can be found in the RCA directory. If you're having trouble with it, anybody who wants to email me, I can find it. Go ahead. Okay. Jim Reed, please go ahead and unmute and share.
Since the classes are giving way to middle assemblies, I'd like to get some clarity about at what level of governance will rest the authority to establish a church congregation, close a church congregation, and to dispose of the real property of a closed congregation.
Hi, Jim. You already named it. That will transfer, assuming all of these things go through, to the middle assembly. I did want to say to Deb, I'm happy to follow up with you as your regional synod staff person on any of the things you mentioned, and just also name that that focus of what is it that unites us is a major part of the restructure team's original final report in the introduction. So those two things.
So the assumption is that a regional synod type of body called a middle assembly will be so well acquainted with the situation of each individual congregation that they can make a determination as to whether a congregation is needed in a new neighborhood or need to be closed in an old neighborhood, and to whose enormement will the sale of any real estate go. This all used to be within the province of ecclesias. Now we're saying it's going to be a province of a larger body, so that, let's say, somebody in South Jersey will be able to make a logical and rational decision on whether the church in Hoboken ought to be closed, or whether that property ought to be sold or retained or turned over. And if it is retained, is it that middle assembly that will have the profits from a church that probably would sell in the multi-million-dollar level? That's the assumption that's behind this consolidation of power.
I'm not sure if I heard a question in there. Let me name that the ideal is that the middle assembly would have the power structure of the classis and be as absolutely in touch with the congregations more closely than current regional synods, but then also have what currently is often more the resources and staffing of regional synods. So the answer is an overall yes, if you hear that.
I can only share my experience as a executive minister for the classis of Greater Palisades, which was a combination of the classes of Bergen and Hudson. And in that experience, if you were a member of the suburban churches, you really didn't have a very good idea off the bat of what the issues were faced by the more urban ones. So that the Northern Bergen County churches and congregations would have to be educated about what was going on in the old Hudson County churches. This was quite the process. It took a number of years. And I'm talking here within just a single classis structure. When these classes were consolidated in the Regional Synod of Albany, there were a number of issues like that. And I would hope that we would go back and revisit that history with a critical eye, because some of those issues that came up within the regional synod of what became Mid-Atlantics are issues that are going to be faced by every one of our middle assemblies moving forward. Don't expect this to be anything but a very bumpy road with an awful lot of dialogue, and to take place not simply by a fiat of approving the wording at next General Assembly or General Synod, but it's going to have to be worked out very carefully and with a lot of consideration for the diversity found within a good many of our regional synods. I don't think a church out in Brookhaven, Long Island, is going to have right off the bat appreciation of what's going on in the classes of Brooklyn. And if they do, it's liable to be that many of their members exited the classes of Brooklyn in order to go out to Grand Haven or out to Long Island. Just a word of caution. A word.
Thank you, Jim. I would point out that if you read carefully all of the documents around what's being proposed, there are ways for middle assemblies to deal with just the sorts of issues you're talking about, and that we are a long way from getting there. And as I promised, the plan is that come fall, we will have a much longer discussion at the Reformed Church Center over just this, but we've got a whole synod to deal with, and we've got some people in line behind you. So I'm going to ask Stan Seagren to go ahead and unmute and share with us.
Okay, I hope this is a quick question, and whether it can be answered comprehensively, probably not. But when somebody raised the question about staff positions being lost, will we, or is there a way for the denomination as a whole, or maybe interested parties, to find out what's happening with that? Sometimes we'll get something saying so-and-so has left the position and so-and-so is taking over, but I don't know, we always do. And it's sometimes helpful for us when we're working with somebody to know, is that person still there? Is somebody else taking the position, or is somebody taking over several areas? So I don't know whether that's possible or not.
Well, from my perspective, thank you for that question. I think that transparency at this point in time is critical, particularly in this season of transition and in this season of all of the budgetary cuts and the movement of our denomination as a whole. I think if there is a way possible, and I'm not the one who has the authority or power or anything to do that, that would be left up to others. But I think that transparency is important, and that there be some sort of notification given to those of what positions have been cut and what we are facing and dealing with as we go forward administratively within the denomination. That's just my thought. Transparency is important.
As the moderator of the GSC for 4 more days, I will pass that on to Eddie. There may be members of his staff on the call who are hearing it, but I'll make sure that he hears that desire that a couple of you have expressed.
Thank you. And I guess I will say, I know it's not maybe as simple as I'm framing it, because you do have people who are leaving for positions who may or may not want that disclosed, or how it would be disclosed. So I want to be sensitive to that, but I do share Kelvin's concern, and like Larry's in the chat, that it's helpful to know what's going on, and yeah, as we move forward.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Yeah, these things don't always, I mean, we don't always get them out as efficiently as we would like. On the flip side of this, my lifelong observation in the RCA is that we don't keep secrets here very well. So anything that is meant to be secret pretty well gets out really, really fast. So have faith. We'll just keep working on it. And you know, when you hear something, check in with somebody and ask them questions and share and see what you know. This is how we're going to get to the transparency, along with our staff working on it. Calvin Reinbrandt. I hope I got your name right. Please go ahead and unmute and share.
Well, my question was, it was decided that decisions would be made on consensus versus Robert's Rules of Order. And I wondered why, what was the reason for that?
That was one of the restructuring team's recommendation, and I was just trying to pull up as I saw your question coming. As far as a pro-con list, one of the drafts from the restructuring team actually had a really good pro-con list in it. It was probably more of a pro list. And just was seeing if that is still available on the RCA website. Yeah, so I was just checking that. But you can also note the you can also note that seedsofchange.org is one of the resources that we named for what we mean by consensus in that recommendation, that we're talking about an actual structured form of a model that would be used. And there were lots of reasons the team suggested this in terms of trying to help shift the tone and tenor of what happens in our discussions together, to have that be more of the beauties of what consensus model can do, in that allowing for diverse perspectives and opinions, and to be potentially a little easier to understand as a model for all people, versus some of the ins and outs of Robert's Rules, which there's beauty to Robert's Rules, which also seeks to protect the minority voice, but oftentimes is used most effectively by those who understand Robert's Rules and are willing to stand up and speak up to name and call things out, versus a consensus model, which does give a little bit more to the full participation of all of the assembly, is some of the things that I would say real quickly about that, and then would point to seedsofchange.org as one excellent resource, and to name that this is an experiment, so hopefully we'll all be learning more together. Anything else you want to add to that, Micah? I see you unmuted.
Nope.
Sherry, would you be good enough to stick that Seeds of Change? I know it was pretty simple, but still stick it in the chat. And I will commit to, after this is done, while Steve is getting the recording together to be up online, I will commit to getting the chat from him, so that we can, all of the resources that got mentioned, we can put in a list, and it will be attached to the web page for this event at nbts.edu. Okay, Susan Mulholland, go ahead and unmute and jump in.
I have a two-part question. I'm still not sure I understand. Are we in fact going to be meeting in person between now and 2028? Or, Joshua, are you planning to be the president for 3 years?
Thanks for that question, Susan. And I'm happy to say I'm not planning on being the president for 3 years.
Okay.
We will still, for the time being, we are still meeting in person annually. The Commission on Church Order will propose an amendment or some amendments that would, if adopted, would allow the General Synod to shift to meeting in person once every 3 years and meeting virtually in the interim years. But that process will come as in the church order report to next General Synod. At least that's what our instructions were, which then would have to be adopted by General Synod next year, and then would be sent to all of the classes for 2/3 approval. And if approved by the classes, would come back to General Synod 2026 for declarative action. And then my guess is that General Synod Council and the General Secretary and the officers at the time would have to entertain the conversation about how that transition looks and is implemented. As Dr. Brum noted, we do have a significant year coming up in 2028. And I would be speaking out of turn, but I would find it highly irregular if we were not meeting in person for that celebration. But again, this is one of those that will have several years before it is implemented.
Well, and then to follow up on that, thank you for clarifying that. It sounds then as if there's the possibility that we might be electing vice presidents online. Okay. Thank you.
It is possible, but it depends a lot on what church order recommends and what all the other changes will be to get this to work. And by the way, Susan, one of the reasons we got Josh to stick around and agree to be president is we haven't told him yet what was happening to him. None of us would agree to these jobs if we knew what we were getting into.
Right.
Okay, George Montanari, go ahead and unmute and share.
Hello, thanks panelists for all that you have said. I hope you can hear me okay. All right, good. Sometimes my mic goes out. I want to just shift gears and speak about something with appreciation, not noted yet by the panel, but the appearance of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church Archbishop Daniel through video greeting to the General Synod. My understanding, kind of a historic moment of connection, conversation between the RCA and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the United States of America. So just really, really grateful that that was able to work out. My thanks to the Commission on Christian Unity, Reverend Dr. Laura Osborne in particular, the coordination that took place with her. So thanks for all of that. I do think it highlighted one of the things that came up before about communication. I noted in the I wasn't at Synod this year, but watching the videotape, seeing a General Synod delegate who was not aware of what the RCA had done over the last 2 years relative to concerns about the war in Ukraine and advocacy and some relationship building. And I think that certainly highlights the need for telling the good work that we do. So just elevate that. And certainly I'm hopeful that that the RCA would respond positively to the initiative proposals that the Archbishop put in front of us. Hopeful that the CCU, the GSC, and the seminaries, in particular, my dear brother there, the neighboring seminary down the road at NBTS, that there would be ways that we can now reciprocate. They've reciprocated to us, and kind of let's keep that conversation going. I think that would be a really neat thing to do. And just personally, I would say that it was to be the congregation where we facilitated those connections between the CCU and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the USA, that was a place of really meaningful congregational engagement and congregational ministry that connected us with the church at large, and that's been meaningful for our folks here, and would certainly encourage commissions to find ways to keep doing that with local congregations. I know so many others do in many other settings. For this congregation, it was a new place and meaningful. So I just wanted to offer that additional window into the Synod. So thanks.
Okay, thank you, George. Someone has dropped a question into the chat and asked if someone can speak a little more about what a gifted elder is.
Sure, be happy to. That is whatever a middle assembly determines it to be, as the actual technical answer. But from the restructure team's perspective in recommending that is to name that there are classes that do currently use elders in supervision already, and that what does it mean to supervise a church? And I would name for the Regional Synod of Albany, there's actually an extensive handbook for supervision. And one of the pages in that handbook names when is a minister's presence required for a consistory meeting, and to name that not every gathering of the people that serve as consistory actually needs to be a consistory meeting. So there's a lot involved in a long, deeper conversation that could happen on that. And the training, I believe, was added to that one as well about what that means. And ultimately that to note that that is the guise of what will be the Middle Assembly.
Okay, thank you, Sherry. Are there anybody else who wants to pitch something in? Christopher McCloskey. Go ahead and unmute and share.
Yeah. So I want to just speak a word of encouragement. So I am actually a member of the Presbyterian Church USA, serving under the Formula of Agreement. And I was a part of a national commission to restructure our middle judicatories, and spent multiple years doing all the work. And then the General Assembly, which is your General Synod equivalent, threw away all the work and didn't go forward with it. So I want to commend you all for taking that bold step to actually do the hard work of preparing yourselves to look towards the future and really retool. And I know it's probably feels very scary for a lot of us, but I think that's exactly what needs to be happening. So anyways, it wasn't a question, just a comment from an outsider's point of view who was admittedly kind of nervous because I thought the work of the of this restructure team was really good. I was nervous that the RCA was going to fall prey to the same instincts of institutional inertia and not change things and just say, well, that looks like really hard work, and it'll cost people some people are going to lose their jobs, or they're going to have to find new positions, or they're going to have to move, and we don't really want to have to do all that work. As opposed to you really jumped in and are moving forward with it. So I really want to commend you from someone who is coming at this from a very different perspective. I've been really uplifted by some of the polity work you're doing, because I see a lot of reflections in what the PCUSA has been doing, and sometimes they've succeeded and sometimes they've failed. And I want to say overall, the work of this synod, which is the first time I followed the RCA synod, really reflects well on the future of this denomination. And I want to say I'm very proud to be working with you in all this.
Thank you. And as a member of the restructure team, I wanted to say we actually asked the Commission on Church Order to be almost in every meeting. And so we were working on this from a policy perspective the whole time, and it really worked out well.
Thanks, neighbor.
Dr. Brum. I also wanted to acknowledge with all the work and all the interactions that you see, like something else that did come up on Senate floor is like when, like, I know we just were walking out of like, we were talking about decreases in size, but there was a term that passed called right size amongst the commissions because I think something that did, anybody who either watched it online or was present noticed the tons of work that we put on the book of on church order, and I felt bad. I mean, I really internally was feeling some kind of way and in prayer for probably the 20 things we dropped on them for this upcoming year. And then we started spreading it out to where even if anybody's going to fill out a nomination form, then we were already increasing them why they probably shouldn't, because there's still going to be 15 of them left. But I did want to appreciate that the term right size, if that goes through, that there were also, with our contraction of other spaces, there was the allowance amongst the commissions to increase sizes where the work is. So like, let's send the people to where the work is. So I did want to, like, I didn't want that to be left out of some of the hard work that is taken, considering our brother's just statement now that we were, as a floor, as an assembly, we recognize that there is going to be some hard work, and we were making accommodations to get that work done.
Well, thank you, Tony. I would point out that the words right size are not in anything that I think we're formally adopting anywhere, but they were used a lot. And for some of us who've been to a few synods lately, we're so much better than kick the can down the road that, you know, we're all almost ready to accept that this is our new catchphrase or something. So thank you everyone for being here. We're at 1:57, and unless a hand suddenly pops up in the next 5 seconds, I'm going to say that it's a good time for us to wrap this up. I want to thank the panel for being here and for preparing for this and willingly saying yes to all of this. I want to thank all of you who have signed up and been present with us. Even if you couldn't be present for the whole thing, the recording will be up online, maybe not tomorrow, but the day, certainly probably by the end of the week. And as I said, we'll put the resources that were mentioned in the chat. We'll all get up on the webpage for this event, so you can find them at nbts.edu when you look under this program. Thank you, everybody. Have a really good afternoon, or if it's still morning for you, a morning. Tony, it's probably still morning for you, right? Okay, so it's still morning for Tony. Some of you, it may be nighttime by now. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. Have a good summer. Bye-bye.